Welcome to the podcast that brings you high voltage, intriguing information, as well as electrifying conversation on all topics current, past, and yet to be. This is Phase to Phase.
The first step in avoiding a trap is knowing of its existence.
I've been having these weird thoughts lately.
Without change, something sleeps inside us, and seldom awakens.
Here are your hosts, Marcus and Drew.
Just a quick heads up here. This is the first episode that we had two different microphones, but we didn't yet have any pop shields, so I have to apologize, but you're going to hear some plosives. But I promise the content is worth it. Thanks for listening.
We're going to be discussing about the Apollo 11 missions and really get to the core of why people question the official moon landing narrative in the first place. Because I don't know about you, Marcus, but throughout my life, I've definitely heard of people here and there freaking making all kinds of claims. Most of the time, crazy. Sometimes not so much. And,
it's a very popular conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I think it's like next to the JFK assassination. It's
probably number two, I would say.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The number two, holding it strong with the number 2 spot.
Stayed there for 52 weeks, man. That track is hot.
And I wanted to kind of clarify. Today we're just going to be discussing Apollo 11 and the moon. So we're not going to be discussing kind of the symbolism aspects, the patches and the programs and stuff, Gemini, Apollo, all these things. Nor are we going to be discussing the kind of dark occult black magic connections of Alan Parsons and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Oh, boy.
Because that's dope, too, and interesting with him and how Aleister Crowley was like his best buddy and all this super weird shit that was going on there. Moon children, etc. And so we're just going to be basically focusing more on just why people, even today, kind of still question the official narrative. And so with that, what is the official narrative? The official story is that Apollo 11 was a space flight that landed the first 2 humans on the moon. Commander Neil Armstrong and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin. Coincidentally, they called him Buzz because he was afraid of bees. That's a lie. I actually just made that up just now.
Okay.
So don't take that to the bank. If you guys are writing like a report for high school, go ahead and edge that out. So these 2 guys landed on the Apollo lunar. It landed rather in the Apollo lunar module. It's called the Eagle on July the 20th, 1969.
Eagle has landed.
Yeah. So 6 hours later, on July the 21st, Armstrong became the first person to step onto the lunar surface. Aldrin joined him 19 minutes later. Together, they spent 2.5 or 2.25-ish hours outside the spacecraft and collected about 47-something pounds of lunar material to bring back to Earth. The command module pilot Michael Collins flew the command module Columbia. That's the one that was up orbiting while the 2 guys were down there.
The one that no one remembers.
Yeah, exactly. Poor guy. Armstrong and Aldrin spent 21.5 hours on the surface altogether, including in the LEM, and on a site that they named Tranquility Base before rejoining the Columbia in lunar orbit. The conspiracy kind of goes, and there's kind of several or whatever, but the kind of general basic one, some or all of the Apollo 11 program, as well as the subsequent moon landing missions, were hoaxes that were staged by NASA, possibly with the aid of any or all of the 3-letter agencies. Most infamous of claims suggest that the Disney Corporation also involved, along with filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, who was recruited to help NASA fake the first lunar landings. Given that his 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey proves that the technology existed back then to artificially create a space-like set. So all the pieces are there, apparently. Conspiracists have managed to sustain public interests in their theories for now 50 years. Despite the rebuttals of experts and third-party evidence and opinion polls that have been taken in various locations, has shown that between 6 and 20% of Americans, 25% of Britons, and 28% of Russians surveyed believe that the crewed landings were indeed fake. Yeah, I know, right? Russians always believing in fake shit.
Well, it was particularly that because that was kind of a sticking point for them. Like, man, they got to the moon before we did.
For sure, and we're going to be discussing kind of why they would or wouldn't say anything about this and the political ramifications thereof. So I thought that was kind of a large number, between 6 and 20% of Americans. That's a huge gap. Like, even if it's 6%, that's a shit ton of people. Now, after you get done listening to this podcast, you'll be able to understand why. I think the first time, matter of fact, I know the very first time I heard about it, I was out with my buddies when I was like in 8th grade, maybe, out skating in front of my boy Jimmy's house for my homies Chris and Flonzo. You've met Chris. And
with your mohawk and your NoFX t-shirt.
Oh, basically. Yeah, right. No, I was more of a poser. But like, okay, now at this point, I already was kind of into like punk music and skate and like, fight the power, the establishment, man.
Well, you can't believe in it then. I mean,
for real.
That ruins
like
your street cred.
Like, yeah, exactly. And so I was already kind of, amenable to the possibility that we're being lied to consistently by the establishment, and that history, at least some recent history, whatever, last 100 years, has definitely all had some sort of skew to it.
Yeah.
So when somebody was like, "Hey, have you heard that? Like, that they fucking faked the moon landing, bro?"
Yeah. I mean, think of the implications of that.
That's exactly. Well, see,
I think that's part of what makes it so popular.
That was my first understanding. It's like, whoa, that means like history's a lie, man. That means that like all the things that we were taught to believe in school maybe didn't happen exactly the way that we like, learned it all and stuff. And I was already kind of like on board with the fact that they would do something like that anyway. Not necessarily like thinking about the logistics necessary to do that, just the mindset of like, oh, these guys are already a bunch of shady a-holes. So like, I'm sure, I'm sure it wouldn't be put past them,
Right.
So that's kind of where the idea first came into my head before I even looked at any crazy documentaries or ones that were like weird or like anything like that. And I'm trying really hard to kind of remember when the first pop culture reference in my mind is. And like you said, I can't even put a finger on it. It's just kind of always been there.
Yeah.
As is kind of hard with any of these, kind of conspiratorial, like alternate history topics or whatever, is that if it happened a long time ago, like JFK or like the moon landing or whatever,
coincidentally, near the same time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Do you ever notice that you never see JFK and Buzz Aldrin in the same place at the same time?
Tyler Durden.
Yeah, right. When things are super old like that, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard to analyze them in an objective fashion because there's been so many videos and doctored footage and doctored photos and stuff like that, and fan videos and footage and pictures and stuff like that. So you can't even really tell unless you're going from like an official source what anything is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of makes it kind of a pain in the ass to kind of really do any research. Not to mention, it's the 50th anniversary, so the internet is just flooded with moon shit right now.
Let's reopen this case.
Yeah.
That's this cold case.
Right, this negative 3,200 degree case.
Ooh.
Or whatever space is.
Yeah.
The space
I get where you were going with that.
Might have heard of a little thing called a space race. No big deal. This is a competition between the United States and Russia, or at that time it was known as the Soviet Union, to achieve the first in-space flight capability.
Right.
So it had its origins in the ballistic missile-based nuclear arms race between the two nations that occurred following World War II. You may have heard of a guy named Dr. von Braun of the NASA community. Does that ring a bell there, Marcus?
Von Braun.
Yeah. He was the technical director of the Pinamunda V2 rocket research facility that was run by Joseph Mengele. Ever heard of that guy?
Okay.
Basically, he's the most evil man that we've heard of in history. This was a dude who, if he existed and if even half the shit that he did was true, he's basically the most evil, monstrous man you've ever heard of. He would perform crazy like scientific experiments and stuff on prisoners of war. Without like anesthetics or, whatever. Just think of the most effed up experimentation you can think of with human beings.
I.e. torture?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He basically was the guy who set up all the knowledge that we received from, to set up the MK Ultra projects, basically.
Right.
After the war, von Braun came to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip. Now, we talked about that one, too,
Great.
right?
Lovely.
Yeah, so that's where
Bring 'em
thousands
over.
and thousands and thousands of, soft Nazis came over so we could squeeze their sweet, sweet brain juices and get all the information and presumably all the technology that would be, developed after that from all this knowledge. So they gave him a new life, a new identity, basically, and some citizenship to come over here and build missiles for us. So he went to work on guided missiles for the United States Army and was later director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. And later in 1970, he actually became NASA's associate administrator, so like the number 2 guy. The technological advances that were required to basically rapidly achieve spaceflight milestones were kind of seen as necessities for national security and, mixed with ideology and the ideology of the time, capitalism versus communism.
Of course. The classic battle.
Yeah, exactly, right? America's second favorite bad guy next to the Nazis. So the Soviet Union achieved an early lead in the space race by launching the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an early lead.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Just go up there. It'll be cool.
Everything will be fine.
We're going to hit you out of a giant slingshot. You may or may not come back, but for the motherland.
Yeah, exactly, right? Totally. Okay, and this one was the first unmanned one. But
Right.
very soon,
Yeah.
doing all
You're
kinds
right.
of shit.
Sputnik
So,
1, yeah.
such as the first human into space, which was an orbital flight achieved by a guy named Yuri Gagarin back in 61. And so very soon later, on the 12th of September of 62, JFK gave his famous, I think it was in Houston, where he said,
We're going to the moon.
yeah, exactly. We chose to go to the moon before the century is out. And we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Very,
Super
very hard.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the promise was made. And so kind of to achieve this super ambitious goal, a budget
Dude,
of,
why'd you throw us in the bus like that? Like, now we have to do it, dude.
right, totally. You made all these fucking promises, dude. How in the hell are we going to deliver this?
Let's get a soundstage.
And yeah, right.
Who's that guy?
Don't give it away,
Kubrick.
Marcus.
Let's hire that guy.
You're
Sorry.
giving too much away.
Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. To achieve this ambitious and lofty goal, a budget of $30 billion would be allocated, which apparently...
Like 1960 dollars?
Exactly.
Yikes.
In today's budget, it's over 150 billion. So that's a large...
So you know
large
Facebook's
tab.
like monthly revenue.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, $150 billion adjusted for today's inflation, as well as dozens of private tech and industry companies, spanning the nation. So this thing was going to be a giant, if certain private industries can get on board to make I don't even know, 2 million things that they have to invent that don't exist yet to go to the moon.
Right.
You know what I mean? The attachment
Exactly.
for this and the plug for that and
Yeah, even just the mechanical stuff, like not even talking about how the computers would work in that era.
Just the mechanical aspect
Yeah.
or whatever has got to be mind blowing.
Like a completely definition of cutting edge science.
Yes. We need to get here. We have literally nothing that'll do that. Let's invent every single thing that we need on the spot right now.
We should maybe make a point of that. It's pretty inspiring, that sort of thing. It's just a testament.
Human ingenuity.
Exactly.
And sheer human willpower.
I hate to do a plug for like PBS or whatever, but they do have a really good tagline for their documentary series that they're putting out this week. It was like it took 1,000 steps to make one giant leap.
Yes.
The incredible amount of man hours and the late nights and all the coffee breaks that went into that.
Oh my
sort of
God,
thing.
totally. This is kind of an aspect that we're going to bring up later. We can go ahead and talk about it now, and you can cut and splice wherever you need to.
Sure.
But yeah, that leans credence to your point of exactly what you're trying. Dude, they did it on the first try.
Right.
You know what I mean? First try, no mistakes.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, missions after that, God rest their soul. I don't mean to speak ill of the dead or anything, but there's plenty of failed space missions that have happened
that's
since.
Part of the thing that I was going to bring up. So, so far, 14 astronauts have died in space shuttle missions that went only 200 miles above the Earth.
Right.
Yet during the Apollo programs, NASA sent astronauts 240,000 miles to the moon and back 6 times.
On lesser
loss of
technologies.
life, dude. Mm-hmm.
Less technologies and less research and
far less.
time spent doing that sort of thing.
Bigger balls,
Experience. Bigger balls. America. Let's experience
Fuck yeah.
bigger balls.
That's what we do. Shit, go to the moon in a fucking tin can made of some goddamn tinfoil? Fuck yeah, sign me up, bro. I'm gonna be a hero, right?
Yeah.
The success rate for the first time Vegas has calculated to go to the moon and everything that it needed to go to the moon was 0.00017, according to Vegas or whatever.
Good God.
Yeah, so it's like they had like no fucking chance and they still made it. But one could just argue that like, the miracle of life is similarly stacked against you. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
What are the odds that, some protein strains, and polypeptides and stuff all came together to fucking form RNA or whatever. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it happens or whatever. I haven't watched it.
I thought you were going to talk about little Drew inside of there managed to swim faster than all the other ones. I was gonna have to rein
learn
you
all
in
this
there.
stuff in school. It's fine. It's sex ed, right? Absolute miracle, and it still happened. So It's amazing.
Not the only miracle the Americans won against the Soviets, though.
That's true.
Sorry.
So just to recap, basically we have JFK promising, that we'll get there by the before the decade is out. We have, of course, the cultural competition going between the Americans and the Soviets, and Americans, unfortunately, are losing. To go into the first of like 7 or 8 steps real quick of the evidence against why people think that the moon missions could have been faked, specifically Apollo 11, is, for one, they had motive. So both political and financial, obviously. Financial kind of goes without saying. If you have $120 billion to allocate or whatever to different companies to build products, and they can charge whatever they want.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most famous jokes about it was that the United States, NASA specifically, spent millions of dollars to develop a pen that could write upside down, and
right.
in zero gravity,
right.
and even underwater and all that stuff. And they spent all this money to do that. And what an amazing achievement. But then Russia was like, dipshit, bring fucking pencil. It's far cheaper. Kind of lends the credence to suspicion of saying well, it seems like you guys are spending an awful lot of money,
right.
and you're not really getting a lot out of it or whatever until the moon, mission actually happened. Desperation to beat the Russians kind of set in pretty early on, since there was a lunar probe that was crashed in about a month before the moonwalks actually happened.
Right.
Russia had all the space firsts. There was the first artificial Earth satellite, which of course was Sputnik, we just discussed. It's in 57, which is the size of a basketball with 4 antennas coming off of it. Second one was lunar probes. The Lunar 1 probe basically performed the first successful flyby of the moon. And even more significantly, the Lunar 2 became the first human artifact to reach the moon when it hurled and crashed near the Sea of Tranquility, Sea of Serenity, not to be confused with the Sea of Tranquility. It's right next door. It's a really nice neighborhood. Have a key code to get in. It's really quiet. It's nice. So that happened in 59. And then later that year, the Luna 3 probe took the first photographs of the far side of the moon, also known as the dark side of the moon. Best album ever. In 1966, the Luna 9 achieved the first soft landing of an object on the moon and transmitted the first close-up photos of the lunar surface. So thanks to Russia, actually, we know what the moon even fucking looks like. Yeah. The third one was first animals to successfully orbit, and that were
monkeys?
Some dogs, actually. 2 dogs. And then finally, in 61, Yuri Gagarin, as I mentioned earlier, he was the first man. Hold
on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you imagine what's going through that dog's mind?
Oh my, I can't even imagine. That joke when the dogs look at you and turn their head or whatever, you just showed them a magic trick and they have no possible understanding. Right. Think of that times a million. Yeah, exactly. It's okay, what are they dressing me up with these weird, space gear looking things on? That's weird. Okay, no problem. Oh, they're leading me into this, little lights? Doorway thing. Okay, that's cool. Oh, they're closing it behind me. Okay, no problem. What's all this scary sound and rocket engine-ness going on?
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly, dude. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure the dogs died.
Yeah. You want to go for a ride, buddy? You want to go for a really fast ride?
Come on, boy. Come on, we're going to the park? Oh, that's messed up, dude. Come on, boy. We go to park. Yes, to Lunar Park. Come on, inside. Shut the doors. Poor guy. No problem. They had the first woman in space, too. A woman by the name of Valentina Tereshkova in 1963. So very progressive. Took us a long time to get a woman out in space.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and then a couple of things happened after the moonwalk. That was their first or whatever. I'm just going to briefly mention here. Number 7 was a remote controlled rover on another celestial body. That was the first. And that was the Lunokhod 1. And that was in 1970. They have weird Russian names. I can't really pronounce all of them. And then, of course, the last one was the spacewalk.
We need to get a Russian person on here.
Yeah, I know, right? And a German, because apparently I freaking talk mad shit about them all the time, too. So I need to have him step in. And then 74, they had the spacewalk with a dude named Alexei Leonovov.
It's okay to pronounce these with an American accent, dude.
Exactly. It was the enemy, okay? They got a one-up on us. Come on, America. So at this time, basically, Russia had logged over 500 times more
space
time. More space time. I don't know how to really they spent 500 more fucking times the amount of time up in space than the United States did before the moonwalk.
Right.
So. Next on the list is U.S. rocket lift capabilities. A lot of people were questioning even if the Saturn V even had the ability to deliver the payload that it needed to escape Earth's gravitational orbit and achieve the velocity it needed to. This was a little hard to kind of look to find the naysayery of people that think that didn't have the ability to do that. The Saturn V rocket burned through 3 stages, each kind of reaching higher velocities and altitude.
Right.
The rocket itself has to accelerate up to 20,000 miles per hour to escape the Earth's
about half as
gravity.
fast as the newest Tesla.
Exactly.
I'm just kidding.
This requires traveling to high altitudes before the speed is attained, though. At lower altitudes, air resistance is much thicker.
Right.
And it's much more of an obstacle. So not only is it holding back the rocket, but it can also cause tremendous overheating because the air particles are bashing up against the hull of the rocket, creating friction, and it gets hot. It's like a heat shield and blah, blah, blah.
Right, okay.
That's the reason why commercial aviation flies at 30,000 feet, because the air is much thinner.
Right. It's more fuel efficient.
You can consume fuel at a better rate.
Sure.
So when the first stage kind of expends its fuel, it separates from the rocket and thus reducing the rocket's weight. So it had 3 or 4 stages of this gigantic thing. You saw
Breaks
the
apart.
video I sent you. This thing's 20 stories tall kind of a thing. And basically the very tippity top is the part that
just
goes
the tip.
to the moon.
That's all you need.
That's all you need.
You win every time.
And the rest kind of lifts off and then kind of detaches third by third and then kind of just drifts in orbit, I guess, until I guess eventually decays enough to where it burns up in the atmosphere.
Burns in the atmosphere.
Very super wasteful.
It is
compared to the new space shuttle,
right?
Which is reusable, obviously.
Yeah.
The other thing too that was kind of weird is that, or not weird because kind of interesting, is that the Saturn V rockets, which are the most powerful rockets that we had at the time, despite a bunch of interviews that I couldn't find in order to post on here or to send you, of Henry Kissinger talking mad shit about the American rocket lift capabilities and how Russia's just kicking our ass at that, which for all we know, that could just be a bunch of blowhardness for him going come on, we need to build better weapons than the Russians and ours are not as good. You know what I mean? So, it could have just been bluster and saber rattling in order to get Americans kind of on board or whatever. And maybe we really did have the rockets to bring us up there. But, the Saturn V rocket is a solid fuel rocket, which that was kind of weird, is that solid fuel, you can store it for way longer. Right. It's way more stable to be stored because it's less ignitable. Mm-hmm. The only problem is once you start the ignition, that's it, dude. You're going wherever you're going. You buy your ticket, you take your ride. Right. You cannot shut it off. It's going. If you need to abort,
interesting.
The little lunar module or the Odyssey or whichever the top part of it was would have to separate from the rocket and let the rest of the rocket just rip by. You know what I mean? Because like I said, there's no shutting it down. As opposed to liquid fuel, which is what the space shuttle uses now. Well, actually, it uses a combination of both, believe it or not. So if you've seen the space shuttle, it's attached to that big orange thing with the 2 white rockets on the other end. So the 2 white rockets are actually solid fuel rockets. Really? So when those go, they go. And that's it. You're going to the moon.
Even those split off, though.
Yes, absolutely. They separate. Exactly. They jettison is the word. The orange is a tank that's full with liquid fuel. And that is...
See, that's interesting. I would have thought that was the opposite.
Right. Yeah, totally. I actually thought the same thing. You'd have kind of the opposite kind of... but yeah, it's this way. And the ignition and the thrust, rather, that's coming out of the tail of the space shuttle is fed from the liquid fuel that can be switched off at any time in any case of an aborting mission. So the next section I'd like to discuss is something called the Van Allen radiation belt. Have you heard of this, Marcus?
No.
So it's also called the Van Allen problem. They were named after him following their discovery by the Explorer and the Pioneer satellites.
Okay.
They're instruments that were on satellites back in 1958. And Van Allen led the scientific community for the inclusion of scientific research instruments on the space satellite. So this is the guy who said, hey, you guys are going to send up different space satellites. These are the instrumentation that you need to have on there in order to gain the data that you want.
Right.
So when it went up there, he discovered a zone of energetic charged particles, most of which organized from the solar wind, and they're captured by and held around planet's magnetic field.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. This donut-shaped field is about 1,000 miles to 25,000 miles above Earth.
So it's just another barrier that the rocket has to clear.
Exactly, to a radiation barrier. And in order for the Apollo missions to be successful, the equipment and the crew aboard the craft would have to be, shielded. Adequately shielded for exposure from these intense radiation waves. Apparently,
so they made the rocket out of cement, which made it much heavier, which meant they had to get a stronger rocket.
Leads to the support to the claims of well, how'd they get past all this stuff, dude? It was that they were in a literal tinfoil, gold foil, can.
Can I say something? It's interesting how conspiracy theorists will cherry pick science. Like they'll use science to denounce other areas of science.
Oh, of course. It's kind of what they're famous for.
I guess so. Okay, you'll believe all the stuff about the magnetosphere, but then you will also deny all this other stuff that, we're using to overcome it.
Yeah, you got to stay consistent.
I don't know.
You have to have consistent logic, otherwise you're just bullshitting yourself, aren't you? I guess this was described by astronauts and people that experienced it as flashes of light, even when your eyes were closed, because these protons were moving like across your brain. You know what I mean? So like even when you closed your eyes, you could see these white flashes. And then matter of fact, there's even recordings. I can't remember if it's Gemini or what. It was one of the Earth orbiting. It wasn't any of the Apollo missions, I don't think. But it was one of the Earth orbit ones where it was like Gus Grissom or one of those like really famous dudes was, I can't remember the exact quote, but he's like saying there's light, there's fantastic light all around me. Like, light following me, light doing that, this and that. And some people are like, oh, aliens? I don't know. Other people are like, well, dude, it might be, depending on how high up in altitude he was, it might have been these protons. These proton radicals.
I remember hearing accounts of people who saw like the atomic tests. They would have the glasses and they put their hands up in front and they could still see like the bones of their hands because the light was just so intense.
Oh my God.
So that's not surprising to me at all.
That whole era of American like history is so crazy, dude. It's so crazy. What the fuck were you guys thinking, dude? All right, let's see what happens when you fucking blow up this one. Bring up T-37, please. Oh, that was cool. Bring up T-38.
Let's detonate a nuke over here.
Yeah,
okay. Now let's detonate a nuke over here.
What happens if we detonate a nuke underground? Ooh, or on the water, or a high altitude test. Let's do that. Yeah. Or actually, about to fucking talk about that right now.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So in 1962, Van Allen himself addressed the American Rocket Society on what he called, quote, the sea of deadly radiation and the upcoming Apollo missions, and theorized that in order to avoid the serious hazard, that it might be possible to clear out the radiation by detonating a nuclear payload in the vicinity and scattering its particles long enough to travel through it.
America.
Right, dude? So it kind of reminds me of those like late 90s, early 2000s disaster movies where our problems are simultaneously caused by and solved by nuclear weapons. So NASA thankfully never tried to clear the Van Allen belt with a nuclear bomb, but an Atomic Energy Commission test in 1962 briefly made the radiation problem much, much worse. With the events of Operation Starfish Prime, which is a test that basically interjected with the Earth's magnetic field in the event of a nuclear war, using basically a 1.4 megaton bomb detonated in the altitude of like 250 miles.
Great.
Just basically blanketing the Earth. Video and photo anomalies. Basically, this kind of comes from like the grainy signals that were bounced.
This is like most of the stuff you see is this kind of thing that denounces the moon landing and all that.
You see him jumping off, making that one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind speech. It's just the worst, like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Yeah. But come to find out, that's exactly
what it is. Yeah.
So apparently these were signals that were bounced from the craft to an Australian relay station that were broadcasted back to California and then finally to Houston, and then projected it on a large screen in Mission Control, where the media then filmed the screen that was being bounced from like halfway across the world, and then transmitted that also across the world for a final time to basically everybody's TV screen.
Yeah.
So everything that we were seeing, we weren't fucking there, but was just that, a copy of a copy of a copy.
Live
from the moon. It's fabulous.
About 2 hours ago.
Yeah, right. So what I didn't know though is that crystal clear tape from the Australian station was recorded
for like archival purposes.
Yeah,
that's a smart idea.
Yeah, you would think that'd be a smart idea.
Yeah,
we're gonna get to that later.
Oh,
so another one of these aspects of these anomalies or whatever is the flag waving. This is This is like the most like stereotypical use of the people who don't know anything about like the moon conspiracy, and yet like we'll pick the low hanging fruit of like, well, didn't you know that the flag was waving, and why would it be waving in space? There's no air in space. Even though technically there's like solar winds and shit like that. But yeah, I've heard explanations even as crazy as saying that like on the denier side too, saying that like, oh, well, it was probably just like movement or like maneuvering thrusters or whatever, which doesn't make any sense because they were both on the moon. Nobody was in the LEM. You know what I mean? So that doesn't make any sense. But the most obvious explanation,
Collins
that I
up there
was,
just making winds.
Yeah, just farting,
Just something to make your boys feel at home.
A-hole. And the most logical explanation was the fact that the flag at the top had a metal rod and spring so that you could unfold it and unravel it, and that would stand straight up. And as a matter of fact, you can actually see in the video that I'm going to be posting where you can clearly see them grab the top of it, of the flag, and then unwaver it. So, clearly there was like a spring or something in there. So that, to me, when people bring that up as we didn't go to the moon, it's just like eye rolling.
Try harder.
Yes, please. Because there's plenty of shit there. The next one is strings and wires. There's basically a whole bunch of videos that they say that, for instance, if you play it at twice the speed, they just look like they're jumping around. Right. And that the theory is that they're actually at a movie studio and that they were on strings and that they just slowed it down to slow motion, making it look like they had 1/6 Earth gravity.
Right.
There is a video, though, that I'm going to be posting up here. The first, 70% of it's nonsense and the last, 80% of it's nonsense. But there's a good 10% chunk in there of watching these two astronauts kind of struggle. One's struggling. They're both, in the same, group. But one's kind of struggling to get up. One has seemed to have, fallen, and his big, cumbersome spacesuit seems to be preventing him from agilely standing up.
Yeah, he's turtling for a minute.
Hard. And there is a scene, briefly, and they kind of show it, 3 times in case you kind of missed it, where it does appear that a string kind of pulls him up or whatever. He's kind of miraculously just kind of is able to get his legs parallel with the moon and then stand up.
It almost looks like a fall in reverse.
Yes, for real. And if I'm not mistaken, this is from Apollo 17, if I'm not mistaken. But the video
not even from the 11.
It's not even from 11, so it's kind of out of our sphere of knowledge. A lot of this, though, too, can kind of be brushed off that they would, the rigs that they would wear for rehearsals, for practice. Right. They would practice a bunch on these kind of things. And that one would say that, why is NASA trying to, pawn off this as official footage if it's really just training, footage of them, and you know what I mean, or whatever, and, trying to sex it up for PR purposes and stuff like that, which is, of course, not right, but it doesn't necessarily prove that.
Yeah, I mean, NASA even still does that,
all the time.
When they release photos,
It's one of the main reasons why people don't trust NASA at all is because every fucking photo you've ever seen has been doctored, basically.
Right, I mean, you gotta look up, when you look up, images of planets and stuff, you gotta look up, the true color, because everything is altered to make it more interesting.
Yeah, you gotta sell it. For some reason, human beings, traversing the cosmos and intergalactic travel is not interesting enough for human beings.
Yeah, you remember that black hole photo that came out, the first actual photo of a black hole? Everyone's like, that looks kind of dumb. Well, dude,
what to do? I can see way cooler shit on my Google Images, bro. So another one is we're gonna go into photos now. So Apollo 11 carried a comprehensive set of camera equipment that included 2 16mm motion picture film cameras, a color television camera. That was the one that was in the Columbia command module that was orbiting. They also had a black and white TV camera outside the lunar module that was transmitting Neil Armstrong's first steps. So that's why also a lot of people well, how was he the first one out there if there was somebody filming him? Because it was attached to the fucking LEM, dude. They also had a Kodak stereo close-up camera, which is the one that was used to film the lunar soil from only inches away, which is that famous footprint that we've seen.
Right.
So during the mission, 9 magazines of 70mm film and 13 magazines of 16mm film were exposed.
Okay.
The 16mm film taken during the lunar module descent provided the first accurate knowledge of the exact landing points of the lunar surface. That what we use now for Google Moon and shit like that. Right. The camera and lens were actually left behind and still rest on the moon's surface at Tranquility Base. It was apparently heavy, and so they just took the film.
Right.
Which apparently you can still see if you look at the Google Moon,
the satellite
pictures. Yeah. So the first one I'm going to be discussing is for photos is light source anomalies in these photos. So this is the multiple sources of light theory. So I showed you a couple of pictures. I showed you a picture of basically it's the LEM in the background, the Lunar Excursion Module, along with some rocks in the foreground.
Right.
The rocks in the foreground are at a 45-degree angle where the shadow kind of casts on them, whereas the LEM is at a straight up 90-degree angle. Now, a lot of people think that this is the reason, exactly, that there was multiple light sources.
Stage lights and whatnot.
Stage lights, right, which would be impossible because they had no other external sources of light. There was just the sun. So one would argue every single shadow
should be at the same angle.
Taken from a picture at the same angle should be at the same angle, which makes sense logically, I guess, if you think about it. You know what I mean? For like a second. And don't think about it for any longer. At least one of the explanations that I kind of came across that seemed to at least make sense is that a low sun and uneven surface can totally distort like the angles and the shapes of the image itself. You know what I mean? So if there were multiple light sources, why doesn't each object cast
more than one
shadow? Which they don't. They only cast one shadow. So that to me is the biggest I don't know.
Because these rocks are at basically the same point, like relatively. They're pretty close to each other.
10 yards away from each other,
so
20 yards away from each other.
Even in theory, if you had lights that were the same strength beaming at both of these things, they should have two shadows.
I mean, I guess unless this set was massive and they had like lights that would point in a certain direction and only spill over that object and not spill over the other ones. I guess that would make sense or whatever. But if you're going to go all through all this fucking trouble of like hoaxing shit, you'd think that like light shadows would be like number one on the list. You know what I mean? Like the things that you would want to fake that would be really basic that people would notice right away.
Get that guy off the set, dude. He's ruining my shot.
Oh my God, right? Like the Christian Bale sound guy fucking like thing. You have one job. You have one job.
There's a boom mic in the corner of this frame. Get it out of there.
Yeah, right. Totally.
You're ruining my continuity, man. Like,
Buzz, we're gonna need to redo that shot. There's a boom mic in your way. Over.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Right? Are you fucking serious?
I have nothing left. I have no emotion left. Do you see how much emotion I'm exuding right now?
Buzz and Neil on the moon. Take 35.
We're running out of film. Sorry, guys. We're gonna have to do it again.
So another one of the photo anomalies that we're going to be discussing here, it doesn't take place during the Apollo 11 missions, but it's just kind of interesting all the same. And that's that there's no rover tracks in basically any of the pictures involving the rover. Now the lunar rover was like a car that they put together. Yeah, exactly. That had like no frame. And was just like a skateboard with wheels and like a satellite dish on the front.
Yeah, and it had a top speed of like
5 or 6 miles an hour. Yeah, super slow. And it was, I'm pretty sure, totally solar powered.
Yeah,
which would make sense.
I think so.
Considering that a combustion engine would probably not work in a zero oxygen environment. So yeah, it was something that they used.
And could you imagine the efficiency they might get out of solar panels on the moon?
Oh my God, right? No atmosphere to go through and stuff. 100% like. This was a vehicle that they used
again about 1/100th of the acceleration speed of the new Tesla.
I'm surprised that's not like a new like commercial or whatever. Because didn't they put one in space?
Yeah, I think
would do
Elon
like a
launched
commercial
one
of that,
with one of his SpaceX missions or
with
something
like a hooker
that.
in the back, right? That's what I heard. So this vehicle was basically used for like research purposes. Taking little drives, going to church
around the Sea of Tranquility.
You know what I mean? Let's go out and just take a drive around the Sea of Tranquility. You know, we never drive anymore, you and me. Let's take the space kids out and just make a day of it, you know? And the reason why people bring this up is because there's no tracks. There's no wheel tracks in any of these pictures. Now, there's wheel tracks in the pictures of like the Google moon and like satellite images and stuff like that. One, of course, could argue that those are all photoshopped. For the actual pictures that we got back from the moon, apparently, from these Apollo missions don't have tire tracks in front or behind. Now, my first logical explanation would be like, well, they just assembled it and then they took a picture of it.
Right. It hasn't even been driven yet. It's not like they drove it off of a ramp or something. I will say
this. It is flat, completely flat underneath the picture of the vehicle. So unless they built it in a perimeter and didn't set anything down in the center, and then it just like, I'm not gonna lie, the people that say that it's fake are like, well, dude, it literally looks like it was dropped by a crane because it's completely, the moon dust is completely flat and undisturbed underneath it. And then there's no tire tracks around it. So how did they drive it to the place where the picture is?
Strange, yeah.
So, I don't know. Take with that one, with what you will. It's not really one that
we rate this a maybe.
Exactly. I'm not really willing to die on that hill. Another section that we're kind of going to really briefly discuss is that there's no blurry pictures. There's no blurry photos, which is
a problem.
Yes, actually, believe it or not, because there was no ability to adjust the focus on these cameras. These cameras were fixated.
Obviously, they didn't have autofocus.
No.
Image stabilization and all that.
These cameras were fixated to the suits.
Right.
So, you could basically press a button and recycle the picture, and that's it. Naysayers basically say that there's all these photos, they're all in focus, and they're all basically within center frame.
Okay, well, I could see that if they specifically said we released every single photo we ever had.
See, that's what I was wondering
like,
too.
Why would they release? I guess again,
why would
we're
they
talking
release
about
shitty,
NASA.
like blurry photos that don't mean anything?
Yeah, they tried
I
to
don't
sex
know.
it up. Why would they release crappy pictures?
Yeah, just to kind of give
You know, I
credence to,
took about 12 pictures of my feet, and they yelled at me because each one of those cost about $300,000. I just thought it was cool. You know, I was trying to be artistic. You guys don't get it.
I could totally
my art.
understand that. I mean, that's exactly what I would think too. Of like, well, why the hell would NASA waste their time with releasing photos that don't show anything?
Yeah.
Other than to shut up the naysayers that are saying like, there's no blurry pictures. And you're like, here's one. Are you happy?
I mean, no matter what you do, they're still going to find something.
Of course, they're never going to be happy. There's some other ones that we're going to just really briefly touch on because, like I said, with this one being so old and so many different photos that come from so many different sources that, you know, you can't trust what you see on photos or videos or whatever. So there's something called Prop Rock C. Showed you a picture of that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Where it has a picture of a rock that kind of has like a picture of a C on it. And naysayers basically say that like, oh, well, this is like a prop rock that was labeled Rock C.
C is for conspiracy.
Yeah. Well done. And that they forgot in their haste of the biggest hoax known to man. They just forgot to like remove the C. There's other shit too that's kind of not really, you know, it's kind of flimsy, such as like
that little C shadow thing kind of reminds me of the Mons Olympus thing. With a face and the face on Mars. On Mars,
yeah, totally. We're like from one angle, you're like, look, it's clearly a face, and then another angle, you're like, that's not a face.
Yeah,
I don't know what the fuck that is.
You're playing the cloud game, dude.
Yeah, you're trying to see, or what's that ink blot thing? Rorschach test. Yeah, exactly. One of the things is that the lunar blast crater has no burn marks. So the place where it landed
has no burn marks.
Yes.
Okay.
Because a lot of people think that it's landing like the way a rocket lands, like straight up and down with like the exhaust jets just going full blown, you know, to slow it down. Like SpaceX style,
right?
Which we've only just started doing that.
Yeah.
We didn't do that back in the day. Matter of fact, from what I was reading, Neil Armstrong set it down so gently, the shock absorbers weren't actually even depressed.
Wow!
And the reason why he had to jump off of the ladder is because there was a 4-foot gap between the ladder and the lunar surface because the depressions didn't lower the shocks didn't lower because they were expecting a much larger. And not to mention when they were landing, they weren't landing via rockets. They were landing via maneuvering thrusters, I believe is what the term is.
Yeah.
So it's actually coming down really gently. It's not coming down with a tremendous Marvin the Martian style landing or whatever. So that wouldn't really make a lot of sense. There was another thing too that kind of is a little weird or whatever, is that there's no dust on the lunar legs, on the LEM's legs. So if you would have landed, it presumably would have kicked up a bunch of dust. All the pictures that you see are they're all perfectly shiny and that kind of thing. But again, if you landed with such delicacy, you know what I mean? One could argue that not that much dust was kicked up in the first place. And the last thing we're going to discuss about the photos, I don't know, I'll let you guys make up your mind on this, and that's the number of photos taken. Some naysayers think that there was too many photos that were taken.
First, there's not enough good pictures, and there's too many pictures.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Hey, there's no blurry pictures. Hey, there's too many pictures here. Hey, these pictures are things that are too clean.
Ah, jeez. Never satisfied.
Never satisfied. Americans.
You know, can I say one thing also? Not that I'm not a skeptical person, and, you know, it's good to question things.
Absolutely.
But that's kind of taking the piss on just all the people that worked on it and all the work that they put in. And
unfortunately, I think because this has been around for so long, there's just been more and more and more questions, most of which are kind of baseless, rather. Yeah. Because people that really fucking want to believe, you know, for whatever reason. And I can only imagine if you were somebody who worked on it really, you know, dedicated your life to this, it's going to be something that would really piss you off. That
I spent 10 years making this fucking screw for this one piece.
Yeah, this zero gravity screw that has a torque of whatever, and you know it's some monumental achievement. You're like, you didn't really go, you liar.
Yeah. Not to mention, because that's the other thing too, is that just the sheer amount of scope of work that was put into this sort of thing.
Oh my God.
There's a lot of people you're paying off and gag ordering.
Oh, totally. And that's one of the things that we're going to discuss later of the evidence against. So yeah, some people think that there was too many photos that were taken. The claim is that, you know, given the available time in which a number of tasks that the astronauts, you know, had to perform and undertook, it left only around 31 available minutes of taking photos. 121 photos were taken of the Apollo 11 mission and on the lunar surface rather. And if you do the math, those numbers basically, it's 3.9 photos per minute or one photo every 15 seconds. That to me doesn't sound all that. I could believe that. That doesn't sound all that bad to me. Even if you literally took one every 15 seconds, which obviously it wasn't. This is an average.
Right.
And if you think about how you take photos when you go somewhere, especially somewhere new, like, the moon.
No one's ever been.
Like if, for instance, you went on vacation or whatever, right?
Dude.
You're not taking pictures every 15 seconds, but you are going up to a spot, taking like 5 or 6 pictures.
Yeah.
And then some time is elapsing, and then you're going to another spot, taking 5 or 6 more.
Definitely anecdotal. I just went on a vacation and I had to delete a whole bunch. I was like, dude, why did I take so many? Like, this is the same thing.
And it's a lot of pictures, right? And you were like, wow, how did I take so many pictures?
Yeah. Especially these days with digital cameras, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Oh my God, right? It actually doesn't sound as bad on the Apollo 11 missions, but as the other Apollo missions were to progress, throughout history and stuff, and you start looking at the numbers of photos taken then, it does seem a little like they're taking a lot of photos.
Wouldn't you want them to take a lot of pictures too?
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is people are talking mad shit, and it's just like, you would want every photo, to expend every
Exactly.
cartridge.
That's
like,
what I would say. If I'm paying for this
thing,
I want to know what it's like to be there.
F yeah, dude. And you're only going to be there for a little while. You know what I mean? And not to mention, everybody on Earth is going to want to know what it looked like up there. And unless you're like a poet and can like express things perfectly through then, you're going to need to take pictures and be like, it looked like this. This next one, which is interesting, fake moon rocks. A piece of moon rock was given to the Dutch Prime Minister.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
By Apollo 11 astronauts back in '69 during a sort of goodwill tour, by all 3 astronauts. And yeah, it turned out to be fake.
This is basalt.
Fake as F. It turned out to be, petrified wood. Curators at the Amsterdam's, Rijksmuseum, not to be confused with the Rijksmuseum of German ancestry, where the rock attracted tens of thousands of visitors each year. Obviously, they want to go see something that's not from this earth. And they basically discovered that the lunar rock.
Did it also have the face of the Virgin Mary in it?
Yeah, right. Totally. That was in the toast that was later made by the scientists that discovered this rock. This lunar rock was valued over
how do you put a price on something like that?
Yeah, well, it's not from the Earth, so when people, just collectors, would be like, "Ooh, want that?"
Yeah.
It's definitely petrified wood. So NASA gave moon rocks apparently to more than 100 countries following these lunar missions in 1969 and the 1970s. These are the articles from 2009 that I found, and they say that they did an investigation, and it's still underway to kind of find out what happened. Although it's making things difficult sorry, what were you saying?
The Courier wanted it for himself, so he swapped it out.
That's kind of what I was thinking, dude. Somebody was like, damn, I could sell this for a shitload of money on the black market.
Or just keep it because it's cool.
Yeah, totally.
I'm never going to the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
I hold this rock in my hand.
It'll be a great centerpiece, I can pick up a lot of chicks with it.
And then when you invite your friends over, whatever, and they're like, what's that? You're like, oh, that's just petrified wood. Yeah, exactly. Why is it the center of your house like some kind of weird shrine? I just love wood, dude. You know me.
Why is there a picture of Buzz Aldrin and a bunch of candles?
Right. No reason. Unrelated. Yeah, they said that they were doing an investigation, but it was making it difficult because some of the countries who received these moon rocks have reported that their moon rocks are stolen or missing. Though they have little value in mineral.
Sentimental value through the roof.
Exactly. The black market value of these moon rocks can be sold for straight up 6 figures sometimes. So my only question was, how in the fuck did Buzz not know that these rocks that he was literally handing the Dutch Prime Minister didn't look or feel?
He ain't a geologist,
real?
Man.
Yeah, I know, but he was the one who gathered up the rocks in the first place. He gathered up these specimens and put them aboard the LEM and then took off with them.
Or maybe he is a geologist. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I have no idea what fucking this guy's doing. That. So I don't know. That was definitely one of the things in my wheelhouse. I'm like, that's interesting.
It is. It is definitely strange.
It doesn't prove anything, but it definitely proves that there's some fuckery going on.
Yeah. And imagine what it would have been if nobody tested those rocks. If nobody was a little bit skeptical.
For it and then sitting in a museum for the last 50 years.
This is just a lava rock. You just painted it white.
For real, yeah. Totally. No big deal.
It's turning my skin green when I touch it.
Right, totally. And everybody around it starts getting sick and losing their hair.
It's really just asbestos.
It's really weird. Top men
sending asbestos rocks. This is what we think of.
It's causing cancer and shit, dude.
God.
This next one that I want to discuss is astronaut behavior. So this is kind of a contentious topic Though it is a little strange. So astronaut interview of Mike Collins, Neil Armstrong, and Buzz Aldrin, when they first arrived back at Earth and they were kind of giving their debriefing to the media. They look like they're literally going to a funeral to me. Like they're all fidgety and uncomfortable and just like long faces and no one's smiling. These are like cocky test pilots, like flyboys as the term is considered. Yes, literally, dude. And, Kevin Bacon from Apollo 13, if anybody's ever seen the movie. And so to me, it's kind of strange that these guys are, I'm going to be posting a video of the entire interview, was like an hour and a half or something like that. But just watch like the first 5 minutes and it gives you a good kind of estimation of like, how are these guys' body language, reacting to the questions? And these are guys that literally just did the most monumental achievement to mankind.
Right.
You know what I mean? You would think that they'd be just ecstatic and just like, laying their balls on the table, as it were. Like, fuck yeah, I just did that, bitch. What? I'm a hero for life. Mic drop.
I'm going to take you home. I'm taking you home.
For real. Totally.
I don't know. I mean, if I may play devil's advocate.
Please do. It's my favorite game.
Maybe they were briefed by some officials and be like, hey man, I know you're excited, but we need to be professional here.
Some men in dark suits came in and were like, dude, you keep your fucking mouth shut.
Yeah, don't talk about the aliens.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. If you tell them about that satellite that shoots nuclear weapons down onto the Russians, I swear to God, I will.
You're not supposed to know about that until the 80s.
Right, totally right.
I don't know how many press conferences maybe they did before or during the missions and
they did
preparations
one post-mission press conference, and that's it.
Maybe they're not used to being interviewed and being a bunch of crowd. I mean, as monumental of achievement that is, that also is a lot of pressure. Because
absolutely, that's basically what most people kind of say in response to that. Is that like, dude, the entire focus of the world, literally of the world.
I mean, how many people were watching that at the same time?
I couldn't even imagine. Like all of the developed world. I imagine.
Yeah.
Like anybody who
had
the
capability.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Another one of the weird statements or remarks that was made at this debriefing was made by Neil Armstrong and Mike Collins in response to a gentleman by the name of Patrick Moore, who had a program called The Stars at Night. And he asked the question basically, when you look up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare? And as we were talking about earlier, the solar corona is like the halo over the sun and stuff. And basically he was just saying like, hey, like without all the impedances of the atmosphere, was the sky
light
just
pollution,
fucking blazing with stars or what, dude? I really want to know that. That's my profession,
Right. Like, could you see the Milky Way and all that?
Right. Yeah, exactly. When you're out in the middle of nowhere, you can see like, oh my God, like, good God, the amount of light pollution that I'm exposed to is ridiculous.
Yeah. Neil
Armstrong said, we were never able to see the stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon without using the optics. So that was a little peculiar. And then Michael Collins kind of seems to jump in and turns to Neil Armstrong and says, I don't ever remember seeing any. Now, this is only strange because years later, Michael Collins would write a book called Carrying the Fire, where he literally just says outright, quote, outside my window, I could see the stars, and that is all. So it's just,
that is strange.
Another layer of things that people are like, whoa, why did you change your story just because you wanted to like sex it up for the book? You know what I mean? Which is understandable. I mean, it's still lame, but it's understandable at least, to some degree.
Well, it is something to note that he was talking about being on the daylight side of the moon, and granted, there is no atmosphere to obscure your vision of the stars, but at the same time, there's also no atmosphere protecting you from the intensity of the sun. And so, like, how bright was that surface of the moon?
There is a picture where they take a picture of the sun. And it just looked like when we were talking about the blurry, how come there's no blurry pictures? Right. There is a picture of the sun, and it just looks like a super insanely bright spotlight with like a ring around it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I could imagine the sun's intensity was intense.
Yeah. I mean, when did those famous pictures of, the blue marble or whatever, when they look back at Earth, like, I don't recall off the top of my head seeing stars in the background, but
I don't remember either. Yeah.
I think it's just like
when you use logic, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Another kind of weird thing about their behavior is that they all quit NASA immediately. They all were like, tapping out. Not even going to be a...
It's because they were spooked by the aliens, dude.
Exactly. And the men in black who told them
and
not
that secret
to say anything
Nazi base on the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Most explanations, of course, for this is just
And
that
they got
like,
a Coach retirement plan?
They were out. Yeah, for
I
real.
mean, how do you top that? That's dropping the mic.
That's exactly
that's going
my
out
point.
on a
It's
high
like,
note.
well, what am I going to go do to design? You know, what else am I going to go,
Next, I'm
go
going
on
to Mars.
do? Yeah.
I'm going to one up
I'm
that
pretty
one.
much topped out, dude. I can pretty much just lay back and be a lazy piece of shit, and I'll still be like considered a hero when I die.
Yeah, like the rest of my life is downhill.
And in addition to that, Neil
I got
Armstrong,
book tours to do, man.
I got money to make, sucker. In addition to that, Neil Armstrong basically did almost no interviews afterward and became a total recluse. Like, I think there's like 2 or 3 interviews.
Yeah, you hear about Buzz
before he
Aldrin
died.
doing lots of stuff afterwards.
Yeah,
but
tons of stuff.
Not so much
going to
about
Antarctica, tweeting a bunch of weird shit. Tell me you heard about that, bro. I want to talk about Antarctica one day. Weird shit. In 1994, for the 25th anniversary of the Apollo 11 missions, Neil Armstrong gives a kind of somewhat cryptic speech to the graduating class. And he said, quote, "Today, we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers." And he's like roaring, crying when he's saying this. He's giving a speech to a bunch of graduating people. I think like Al Gore and Bill Clinton were there, and he's saying there's a lot to be discovered,
right,
if one can pull back one of truth's protective layers. So naysayers are saying that he's hiding something.
Yeah, that
sounds
very strange.
It does kind of sound cryptic. I could kind of see both ways of where you could lend credence to either side.
And is he overcome with emotion that they're graduating, or is he overcome with like his brain malfunctioning from all the brainwashing?
Yeah, right,
doing?
totally. Who knows? For all I know, he's just crying, like thinking about all of his achievements and like,
true,
you know what I mean? And saying like, hey, if you guys can get past the bullshit, basically, whether it was manufactured bullshit or just natural bullshit that you have to get through in order to find truth, you know, that there will be, tremendous, rewards and treasures that can be, that await us if we just can peel back protective layer.
But yeah, it could be definitely that sort of thing where he could even be talking to the skeptics and be like, if you can get past this sort of thing, like that's amazing
exactly
discoveries.
How I see it. Is that like, look, just objectively, truth, valuable shit, right?
Or
like,
even you could even interpret it another way, maybe that if you go back to like Copernicus and everything, and heliocentric versus geocentric,
totally.
That was the belief,
Absolutely.
We believe,
but you had to peel back
is
that like protective layer of nonsense before you could get to the truth that was at the sweet, creamy truth at the center of the candy.
And so much of science is just theories that we currently accept because we don't have any better thing to disprove it with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I love it. It's funny when people say like, well, it's settled science. You're like, oh, it is it? Science is settled, I guess. Like, it's
I guess we'll just stop doing experiments.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it'll just not a constantly evolving thing where we keep learning new things based on new evidence and changing our hypothesis based on that evidence. Okay, my bad. I didn't know how science worked. So another one that I felt was actually really interesting for me, this is kind of my favorite of the topics.
Okay.
Missing or deleted telemetry data. So mankind's greatest achievements, all the logistical freaking miracles and nightmares that it took to get everybody there, the hundreds and hundreds of people, or thousands even maybe, the technological advancements, the money, the will, all the rhetoric and the promises and
the balls,
the big balls. Yeah. And then they just lost it or deleted it.
So what exactly is this missing data?
So an Associated Press article from 2015 read, and this is found all over the place, by the way. I just picked this Associated Press article because most people are like, oh, Associated Press, that's a trusted thing. Mm-hmm. Quote, NASA could put a man on the moon, but didn't have the sense to keep the original video of the live transmission. An embarrassing acknowledgement, the space agency said Thursday it must have erased the Apollo 11 moon footage years ago so it could be reused, the videotapes. So 45 videotapes in all, way more in the telemetry data tapes. There's like 200,000 of them, or 200 of them, I think, rather. So there's a new Apollo 11 documentary that's out this year, 2019, for those of you that are listening in the future.
In the future.
In the year 2000. This features HD footage, like never before seen. Like, and it actually has been seen. It just hasn't been seen like this.
Right. I'm sure it's just rescanned films.
It is. This is footage that Hollywood has enhanced from the grainy, blurry videos that we know of so well, that we're all familiar with.
Same way they do remasters now.
Exactly,
you can scan the original film.
Exactly.
And,
sex them up all money so they look all good. I'm going to be posting a NASA.gov PDF where they basically talk about the missing and deleted telemetry data and also them discussing the fact that it took like 3 years for them to do this investigation to find where the shitty tapes were, and then giving them to Hollywood to freaking, spruce them all up and make them all money. In the post, people just need to read like the first 2-ish to 3 pages, and it'll be very apparent like what the fuck just happened. So that to me is like the biggest, weirdest thing. Like, why the fuck would you videotape over that? Like, obviously you need more videotapes, but like, what? NASA's so broke you can't fucking. Well, you wanted to do video, you wanted to get the new episodes of Starsky and Hutch or whatever 70s show that was out
Don't
back
give
in
the
day.
people that complain about NASA's budget any more money.
Basically, right?
Any more fuel to their fire.
Right, dude. All this boondoggly nonsense. And so to me, that's like one of the biggest things of like, dude, you guys were the keepers of the most monumental achievement known to man.
Right.
And you just taped over them for what?
I think maybe they just didn't want to say that they lost
Mork
them.
and Mindy, dude. Or what? Well, then, okay, if you don't want
Not that they should have.
If you didn't want to
Obviously,
admit
they
that
should
you
have
lost
better.
them, that's just as bad to me. You know what I mean? Like, whoops, sorry. That's like, was it Dick Cheney or was it Rumsfeld the day before September 11th on September 10th who said that the Pentagon had just misplaced $2 trillion in funds? It just, I just lost it. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere. It's like,
it's Bill's fault.
What Bush said. Yeah. Oh, maybe it's under here. Maybe there's some Al-Qaeda underneath this thing here. But yeah, to me, that's like a blunder of fucking monumental proportions. You would think the instant that they got that telemetry data and that
back it up,
that
back
crystal
it up,
thing,
back it up.
put it in a fucking save and just don't touch it till we want to tote it out for the 40th, 50th anniversary.
It happens all the time in the digital era of like losing the source code to original things.
Yeah, the digital era.
Granted, this obviously has a lot more of importance, and it definitely should not have happened. But I'm just saying it does happen all the time.
It does happen today. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially because if you go back to something that's been archived from so long ago, those are different methods of archiving it.
Oh, absolutely.
Not only is that on magnetic tape, they might have even organized it differently, and it's on some warehouse and somewhere. And,
there's 10 different categories.
Everything back then was on paper, and somebody lost the paper, or there was a fire, and who knows?
Top men.
Yeah, exactly.
The last thing we're going to kind of discuss.
Like, who has a zip drive anymore?
Yeah. Can you imagine if I lost this? The last one we're going to be discussing is I've just kind of labeled it weird stuff because I can't really put like a name on it or whatever. So we're going to start with NASA's inability to send men to the moon today hypothetically means that they could not have done it in 1969. I sent you that little video clip of that astronaut Don Petit, who's a NASA astronaut who's been up to the space station like a dozen times or whatever. Said back in 2017, quote, "I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed it. That technology. And it's a painful process to build it back up again." End quote. Now, to me, that's a bunch of shit, dude. That sounds like fucking nonsense that a smart person wants to pawn off on somebody who's not smart in order to like get out of something.
Right. That's a politician answer.
Yes, that is a politician answer, dude, for sure. Because in my mind, you can't really destroy technology. Like, if you think about it, you'd have to kill everybody who knows about this in order to, quote, destroy the technology.
Yeah.
Because you don't destroy technology. You just evolve it.
Right.
So technically, if you've evolved technology, you can always devolve it. You know what I mean? Like that sentence is so retarded. It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, you were saying that maybe like he was making like a different statement that I'm kind of not really fully.
I think it's just kind of misinterpreted. It is weird the way he said it, but basically we don't do that sort of thing anymore. So we haven't been advancing that sort of technology. So
it's too hard to bridge that gap of the space that we've stopped.
I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this. Like,
well, it's hard because we've done a bunch of space shuttle missions. So it's like, what do you mean we haven't been trying we don't have the technology? That's
what they used back then to send people to the moon is very, very specialized equipment, very antiquated. It's made for that
very
sort of
unique.
Thing. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And since we haven't done that and we haven't had a need to do that, like you said, that sort of technology, it sounds weird to think of, oh, that's old technology. We can't do it anymore.
So you mean physically that technology, like literally that sprocket, that sprocket doesn't exist anymore. That altimeter doesn't exist anymore.
We don't have
that gimbal doesn't exist anymore.
And
but
even
still,
like the blueprints or whatever.
But even that, dude, is like...
Because hold on, because most of our space... Our space experiments are done on the ISS now. Like, there's not enough a reason to go to the moon to spend that much money to go there that we can't do on the ISS. Because we just need to learn about how to survive basically in space, how to grow things in space. And
first,
right, exactly. We're not going to gain that much from going to the moon. We know,
not really.
We know a lot about it.
If we can get to Mars, it'll be good to get to the moon again, just so that we can use it as like a
launch pad.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, halfway.
Until we can get to
rest stop.
For real. Until we can get to Mars, the moon is kind of like, that's cool that it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And just the amount of hoops we'd have to jump through these days, because that was before OSHA.
Yeah, good call. Jesus Christ, dude. The amount of like scrutiny that any like job site gets or whatever, just these like insurance whores, because they don't want to, they don't want to be liable for literally anything.
Yeah.
So they're going to create like a process of you like building or creating something, whatever that basically is.
You gotta be a bubble boy.
So safe that there's no way you could hurt yourself. Only problem is you won't be able to get your work done.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine with like the rules that they would like enact or whatever involving like space travel and making it safe.
Yeah. I mean, because nobody wants any more dead astronauts, obviously. And
Except
especially
for Russia.
these days.
I'm just kidding. I love you, Russia.
Especially these days with social media and everything, like they're never going to hear the end of that,
Oh my God. Good
So,
call.
Yeah. I hope that's an adequate explanation of like.
It's not, but we're going to go ahead and roll with it anyway.
Okay, all right.
Secondary in the weird stuff category, the computer that took them to the moon. So
Hollow guidance computer.
Help explain the technical like aspects and kind of relate to a noob like myself who doesn't have any fucking technical expertise whatsoever.
Okay, so imagine trusting your life, and not only your life, but three astronauts' lives, and all these people's hopes and dreams and money.
That's true.
And
America's hope, and America's like dominance on the hierarchy stage of like foreign power and stuff.
And this doesn't directly translate, but it's a good metaphor just to understand it. You take two original Nintendo Entertainment Systems and you duct tape them together, and that's getting you to the moon.
Oh my God. That's terrifying.
But I mean, at the time, it was mind blowing. It's the
pivotal like point of computer like capability, calculating capability.
Because there was actually two different forms of memory.
Right, like RAM and ROM.
RAM and ROM. No,
sorry.
Like the physical memory that's
desperately
stored.
grasping at straws to not sound retarded.
It was actually really cool. If you're into technology, it had this really cool interface system called the disk key. It had this really cool forms of memory. One of them was called rope memory, which is just like, how would you explain it? It just looks like spaghetti or just like kind of
like a wave sign.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess. And it was actually developed by a woman who worked at MIT.
Nice. See, progressive again.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one up on you, Russia.
If you just boil it down to simple, how fast the processing speed is and how much memory it had, it's basically two NESs wrapped up.
So it's like 4 kilobytes of RAM, right? Which is like nothing.
To these days, yeah.
Yeah, your phone has like literally 1 million times more RAM. So
I stopped following cell phones a while ago, but yeah, I think mine has 2 gigabytes.
And like 1 megahertz processing power, I guess, which also is like tiny. So yeah, that was the other thing too. That's like it's kind of neither here nor there. It's just one of those like, damn, that's what got us. That's all it took to get us there. Mm-hmm. That's terrifying.
Right. And that kind of feeds back into that last point of like, well, the technology's so much better now, but it's very different.
So that's kind of it in the wheelhouse for evidence against. And I'm just going to briefly touch up on a couple of little things of, for the evidence for. So the landing sites are visible with telescopes in Google Moon. So that's right there. You can just use that. Now,
that settles that.
I will say that the space, or rather the landing sites of Apollo 11 and 12 are pretty sparse. They say that there's a bunch of shit left up there, like the fallen
camera lenses.
Well, there's a camera and the lenses and the lower part of the LEM.
Well, what about the
LEM
rover?
Splits in half.
The rover's still there, isn't it?
For the other ones, yes, but for the 11 and 12,
right? We're talking about 11,
yeah. There's just way less up there than I thought. Now, when you look at 14, 15, 16, and 17, there's a ton of shit up there that I'm like, okay, that's a little harder to naysay. Right. So another thing is what you discussed, and that's basically how could they keep something so big, so monumentally huge, with so many people and so many moving parts? How could they keep it quiet for so long? Right? Which is a totally logical explanation. The only thing I would say in response to that, for a rebuttal, would be that, the Manhattan Project was a massive project that expanded to like 4 different parts of the country, Los Alamos and the different facilities.
Yeah, I mean,
and
during
employed
that
129,000 people. You know what I mean? And 3 years, 4 different locations, 0 leaks. You know what I mean? Thanks to compartmentalization of people. You know what I mean? It's like it's that Bob Lazar shit that you were just talking about.
Right,
Of like, you come in, we don't show you the whole facility. We just show you this. And then you report to me. You don't talk to anybody else.
Well, if I can make 2 counterpoints on that.
Please
One
do.
is that's military with a lot more discipline and, underhanded threats
For
sort
sure.
of thing. There was also, because it was of the times and everything, there was a lot more pressure and national security. And that was before people, didn't stop trusting the government. And
It's true. This is still
we
in the
really
golden
wanted to
age where they
fight.
believe in everything, no
Right,
matter
exactly.
what. Yeah, if the government said so, it must have happened.
Right. And we were under much more of a threat,
For sure. And
rather than just
during
a dick measuring contest with the
between Russia
Soviets.
and America.
Yeah.
Whose is bigger?
Yeah.
I think mine looks a little bigger. The Manhattan Project kind of shared the same era of patriotism and,
Right.
government could do no wrong. So
Still
it
before
would be
Watergate.
easier to keep it quiet. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Hypothetically, one could argue
Right.
because all these guys are fucking, can't let
Patriots
the Ruskies win.
and-
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And loose lips sink ships. Another kind of thorn in the side of naysayers is the fact that all Apollo missions were independently tracked by England and Russia, our allies and enemies at the time, both of whom sent
There you
letters
go.
of congratulations after the moonwalk.
Right. And they would definitely have a horse in the race of trying
Yeah,
to
what
disprove
motivation
us.
would Russia have, our sworn ideological enemy, have to
Yeah.
aid in the U.S. cover-up?
Right.
You know what I mean? Which we're going to get over that. We're going to get to that here in a second. As far as what could be big enough for them to also be like, yes, it's true. America went and
Because we got blackmail on you.
yeah, for real, something, or there's something else.
We're going to
there that
release the
they're like,
dossier.
Yeah. Apparently they peed in bed. I don't know. We have video footage. Some brief things I want to talk about here is the Hollywood films and the Kubrick connection.
Aha. Here we
So,
go.
have you heard anything besides what we mentioned kind of earlier about
Besides
2001: A
that?
Space Odyssey coming out in '68 and Kubrick?
Something about secret messages in The Shining?
Yes. So there's the movie from 1980 called The Shining, or The Shinning,
Shinning.
if you don't want to get sued, where apparently Stanley Kubrick, he left little clues peppered throughout this movie for some reason. There's a documentary called Room 237 that kind of documents this whole claim. And the film has like 9 segments. Each segment is focusing on the different elements within the film. The film has directed by Rodney Asher, and the title refers to the room in the haunted hotel featuring in The Shining where the character is warned to never enter. So take with that you will. I've watched most of it. It was a long time ago that I watched it. It's definitely got some stuff that I'm like, okay, interesting.
Right.
And other things that are like so insanely like graspy at straw that it's kind of hard for me to take it seriously.
It's a little silly.
A little bit. Even in the beginning, it's like, and as you can see, as the camera pulls in a slow pan up to reveal the castle, you can see that the hedge trimmings are in the shape of a rocket.
Again.
And you're just like, dude, really? Like, that's the extent of like your other stuff is kind of cool too, or whatever. When the kid's wearing an Apollo shirt and da-da-da-da,
sure.
and you talk about other stuff too. But some things on there are just like, bro, why'd you even put that in your documentary?
Yeah.
You're stacking more
it's
weight
the,
on the shit side of the scale than on the truth side. You know what I
It's
mean?
like it's a buckshot, man. Just trying to hit.
Yeah, just trying to spray and see what fucking hits.
Eventually, if you say it enough times, it'll become true. But I mean, to be fair, if any director would have done it, it would have been Kubrick.
I was just going to say that,
because of
dude.
his
If anybody
attention to detail.
could have left clues or could have faked the moon landing via like a filmography or television, it would have been Stanley Kubrick. This dude was a genius.
Right.
Another Hollywood film aspect that I wanted to briefly touch on was a film that was made in 1977 called Capricorn 1. It's a terrible movie. Fucking awful. Great plot. Great idea.
Poor
It
execution.
was just so terrible. And then the ending is like laughably hilarious, like where they show like the same scene like 3 times. And just like that old Monty Python like shot or whatever,
I know
where
exactly
you
where
guys running
you're
up
going.
like 30 times. Yeah, it's basically that, but like it keeps going like slower and slower motion. The plot of this movie is basically, in order to protect the reputation of the American space program, a team of scientists stage a phony Mars landing. 3 astronauts participate in the government scheme to fake a manned landing on Mars in this conspiracy thriller. Soon, the astronauts discover that they have become expendable as the government plans to kill them to prevent the truth from being revealed. So, cool plot, terribly executed.
Okay.
O.J. Simpson's also in it, which is also not an awesome thing. But I just thought it was interesting.
He was the one who was supposed to kill them. Allegedly.
Right, he's the Man in Black. I just thought it was interesting because this movie came out in 1977, and already it's like a mainstream thing of like, hey, maybe we could fake a space mission.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I thought that was pretty interesting. That it was pretty early on in the cultural zeitgeist that maybe some fuckeries
People
going
were
on
skeptical.
with the space program. Right. So that about wraps it up. I want to kind of briefly touch on some myth and lore regarding the space program, such as dead astronauts and dead cosmonauts. The lost cosmonauts, or the phantom cosmonauts, as they're sometimes called.
Is this the Russia connection that you were getting at earlier? Okay.
Are subjects of a conspiracy theory alleging that Soviet cosmonauts went to outer space before Yuri Gagarin, but their existence has never been publicly acknowledged by either the Soviet Union or Russia's space authorities. Proponents of the lost cosmonaut theory argue that the Soviet Union attempted to launch 2 or more manned space flights prior to Gagarin, and that at least 2 cosmonauts died in those attempts. Another cosmonaut named Vladimir Ilyich, he's Russian. His name's Vladimir and his name's Russian, is believed to have landed off course and been held by the Chinese government.
Really?
Possibly to this day.
Wow.
The government of the the government of the Soviet Union supposedly suppresses this information to prevent, bad publicity during the height of the Cold War.
I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely possible, but if that's true, like, holy shit, like, can you imagine being like a political prisoner and...
Oh, according to these papers, you don't actually exist.
Yeah.
So we can't give you back.
Sorry, your identity was wiped for the good of the motherland. And also, between the years 64 and 67, there were 10 American astronaut deaths and 8 Russian. 6 of those 10 occurred in 67 alone. Astronauts Freeman, Bassett, C, Rogers, Williams, Adams, and Lawrence all died in airplane crashes. And these are like expert pilots.
Right.
So that also lends kind of the credence of like, whoa, what happened? Another one, astronaut Givens, was killed in a car crash. Yeah, between those short span of years, there's a lot of astronaut deaths.
Right.
But none of them happened in like the shuttle or the capsule or anything like that.
So it really wasn't the one shot, without fault. You can't look at that in a vacuum and say, oh, it was flawlessly executed.
That's true. Yeah, totally. So the mission itself was flawlessly executed, but the build up to get there was a long, arduous process laden with dead bodies.
It's kind of disrespectful to the memory of all those other astronauts.
Absolutely, dude, for sure. It's not like you said, it's not going to vacuum. It's not like these guys' achievement was aside from all the other achievements. They're all part of one big monumental human achievement.
Right.
So I just want to briefly go into some weird moon facts because I thought this was kind of interesting or whatever. Nobody has a solid theory, rather, of how the moon got there.
Right.
So this was, I thought was interesting, is back in the day, they had something called the whack theory or the big whack theory. Whacking in my tool shed.
Or collided with Earth.
Yeah, like an astral body collided with Earth and busted off like a part of it.
Right.
And that part got caught in Earth's gravity because of its mass and yada yada. Well, that didn't work out, so they came up with a new theory called the double whack theory, which is the same exact thing, except for that astral body that hit it the first time didn't have enough escape velocity to escape, and then came back and smacked Earth again, breaking off the chunk or whatever, even though that astral body somehow then had enough energy to leave orbit. So weird. Weirder still is...
Well, actually, Earth was a twin, but, the other one was kind of underdeveloped.
Earth was the Danny DeVito of the twins, and the astral body that came into contact was like the Arnold Schwarzenegger, had all the good shit, and just came and whacked Danny DeVito in the face and left him just like a short, balding, fat guy.
Love you, Danny DeVito.
Yeah, right, totally. Actually, you were amazing in Batman Returns, just so you know, and in all the Sunny in Philadelphia shows. You're hilarious. Stranger still is the hollow moon theory. Have you heard of this, Marcus?
Uh-huh.
Have you heard about this?
Sister theory to the hollow Earth theory.
Yeah, exactly, right? This I kind of rolled my eyes at when I first heard about it, but in November of 1969, the moon was hit by a lunar module with the equivalent of a ton of TNT. Shockwaves built up, and NASA scientists said that the, quote, the moon rang like a bell. Morris Ewing, a co-director of the seismic experiment, told the news conference, quote, as for the meaning of this, I'd rather not make an interpretation right now. It is as though someone struck a bell, say from the belfry of a church. A single blow that they found had reverberated continuously for 30 minutes, which is very surprising. And then a couple of years later, they landed another lunar
just
asteroid.
like for testing, or
So I think some of the lunar orbiters that were just unmanned craft eventually terminated. They crashed them into the surface.
oh right, sure, like they do for any sort of
Totally. And as a matter of fact, I think the second time, the time that I didn't just list just now, but there's another time that they had dropped, I think the remnants of the LEM, because after the LEM jumps back from the moon's surface and connects with the capsule up where Mike Collins is driving, they have to ditch the LEM, the thing that got him there.
Okay, right.
And so once that hits the moon's surface, it'll hit with a tremendous force.
Sure, he's just dropping it.
Yeah, exactly. And
nothing to slow it down.
They have exactly.
Yeah.
They have seismic monitors, seismometers, whatever the fuck they would call them, up on there that would register different seismic activity and stuff. And rather than whereas on Earth, where
it'll just be a plunk,
where it hits and it vibrates for a second and then it goes away. Apparently, when
kept
it happens
shaking.
on the moon, it just keeps going. And leading scientists to fucking fathom that maybe it's straight up hollow.
Maybe we do have a reason to go back there.
Yeah, we absolutely do. So I embedded a video in the description that you guys can take a look at. It's only 3 minutes long, but it's really interesting. Another interesting thing is that moon rock minerals, besides having large quantities, sometimes 10 times the amount of normal quantity of titanium in some of these rocks, which is obviously we use for everything, like batteries and also randomly uranium-236 and neptunium-237 were found up there, which if you guys aren't big science guys, those are non-naturally occurring elements. Those are elements that apparently are byproducts of the creation of plutonium. So what does that mean? I have no fucking idea.
That is really weird.
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, warrants more investigation of finding how did it get there? Was it a byproduct of something that happened billions of years ago? Was it a byproduct? What's the deal? And a lot of people actually, especially furthering up with this hollow moon theory, the reason why there's so much titanium on the moon is because titanium is such a strong metal that if you had a hollowed out planetoid, you would want it to be able to withstand all the meteors and asteroids and impacts and stuff. So what else would you develop it out of other than something that's insanely strong and light? As well as the same that moon rock doesn't absorb heat well.
Okay.
At all. It's a material.
Is titanium a good conductor of heat?
I have no idea.
Okay.
All I know is that moon rock is not like a ferrous heat conductive material, which is great because if we ever could use that for vehicles going in and out of the atmosphere, because that was one of the main reasons why it was so scary to go back to Earth, is because to re-enter at Earth's atmosphere, you had to get the perfect angle.
Burn the F up,
yeah, exactly. If you go in too steep, you'll burn up. If you go in too shallow, you skip off into oblivion.
Slingshot, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you had it made out of this moon rock material, hypothetically, no matter how much friction and heat resistance you're getting, it's going to keep the core at a stable temperature. A lot of weird facts with our moon. Our moon compared to other moons in our solar system is giant, massive.
Right.
It's bigger than Pluto.
Right.
There's a book called Who Built the Moon? And it's just full of a bunch of weird facts by a bunch of astronomers that threw it all together about
now, when you say bigger than other moons, you mean relatively compared, system. Right? But even then, it's relatively compared to all other moons, or relatively compared to its planet.
Relatively compared to the size of the planet. The size of the planet should help dictate the size of the moons that it has.
Right. That makes sense.
Based on
because the moon is
mass and gravity and stuff that I don't actually have any idea about.
Right. Right.
In this overview, it says, quote, "The moon has confronted scientists for many years. It does not obey the known rules of astrophysics, and there is no theory of its origin that explains the known facts. In fact, it shouldn't really be there at all. When researching the ancient systems of geometry and measurements used in the Stone Age that they had discovered in their previous book, Civilization 1, the authors discovered that their greatest surprise that the systems also worked perfectly on the moon. On further investigation, they found a consistent sequence of beautiful integer numbers when looking at every major aspect of the moon. No pattern emerges for any other planet or moon in the solar system. For example, the moon revolves at exactly 1/100th of the speed that Earth turns on its axis. The moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun and is precisely 400 times closer to the Earth. They also discovered that the moon possesses little or no heavy metals and has no core. In fact, many speculations suggest that the moon is hollow. If our moon did not exist, nor would we. Right. Experts are now agreed that the higher life only developed on Earth because the moon is exactly what it is and where it is. The moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is extraordinary that all existing explanations of its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. When all of the facts are dispassionately reviewed, it becomes unreasonable to cling to the idea that the moon is a natural object. The only question that remains is who built it.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right? You can kind of see this even just in a eclipse. If you ever notice, the sun is like the exact circumference that the moon is.
Right.
Which is weird because the moon would have to be its own diameter. At the proper, the proper diameter of the moon, the proper distance away from the moon from the Earth.
Yeah, I've noticed that, but I never thought about it.
Never even thought about it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I thought about it. It is weird
the
that it's the same size, but I never thought about, that
to like
that
1/100th
means
of the inch or
that
some crazy laser, just that in and of itself was a little weird for me when I was reading this. I'm going like, it almost feels like there should be more attention on the moon than on the moon missions. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we still don't know what the fuck this thing is.
Right.
Technically, there's more conjecture about the moon itself than there is about the missions. You know what I mean? In conclusion, there's basically three kind of aspects to this whole thing. There's the official story. We went when we did, how we did, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. The second, of course, is that it's a hoax. We hoaxed the whole thing. Kubrick and Disney were hanging out, fucking high-fiving each other at how they pull the wool over the eyes of everybody while these three astronauts were going to take this secret to their graves, as well as all the other people that I suppose could have known, or maybe were compartmentalized, or maybe they just, because there's always the theory of saying like, well, what about all these people, these technical people at the bottom, guidance and, well, I mean, when they did shoot, like a probe to the moon, they could have just had the telemetry be reading back from that, and that's what they were reading of, like, and thinking that it's actually the three dudes up in the can, when in reality, they're getting all these mathematical numbers and stuff from an object that is there, but is not the LEM.
Yeah, unbeknownst to them, yeah.
Right, totally. And then the third kind of most crazy of these possibilities or whatever is if we did go to the moon, but the stuff that they saw up there was so fucking crazy, and the experiences that they had up there were so monumentally insane that they had to cover it up, and that this is where the theory possibly comes from. So there's this book by a man named Richard Hoagland, who is was like a NASA scientist. I can't remember how long he worked there. Another guy too, named Mike Barra or something. And they contest that Apollo 11 moon hoax originated from NASA.
Really?
That at some meeting where they got a bunch of people together, whoever the right people needed to be.
To throw people off the trail?
Yes. To be like, hey, we're gonna intentionally put out all this disinformation to get people to chasing their tail, because what we're really gonna do is airbrush out all the like crystal spires that are like 10 miles high and all the alien shit that we found on the dark side or whatever it is that they decided or whatever. And that literally NASA was the progenitor of the moon hoax to hide a far, deeper conspiracy.
Of course, there's always a deeper conspiracy.
There's all this like alien technology and maybe first contact and yada, 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 yada. So who knows? All I know is that out of all three of those, it basically doesn't really matter because even if we did go to the moon on Apollo 11 or if we faked it, America was fucking bored with it by the first 15 minutes. You know what I mean? Which is really unfortunate, dude. And I don't really know what to say about that because all of this stuff is basically overshadowed by the fact that people couldn't give two shits by the time Apollo 12 had, getting ready to leave the launch pad. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate to me because it's like, dude, if we really did go to the moon, that's fucking nuts. And we should be like amazed by that for the next like decade. Or conversely, if we didn't go to the moon and we faked it all, what a monumental achievement that would be. You know what I mean? And we should be psyched about that too.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
You know what I mean? Like, I actually read this thing where this guy was like, it would actually be harder to fake the moon landings than it would be to go, which I think is fucking the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I still think it would be a monumental achievement if you fucking pulled the wool over that many people's eyes for that long, for 50 years. That's amazing, dude. Last thing I was going to briefly mention is just check out the books, Who Built the Moon, and also Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA. That was that book I told you about by Richard Hoagland and Mike Barra. Certainly interesting. It's definitely some stuff there to get your eyebrows raising. There's so much to this, and there's so much that we never got to. Again, this is one of those old conspiracy theories that is so old that there's just so much in it to cover that you really can't do it. You could have an entire podcast on the moon missions and stuff. Not like an episode, like an entire podcast that was dedicated just to talk about crazy moon shit.
Right.
And you could have, endless episodes and stuff. And so, but I don't know. I guess without further ado, I guess that kind of concludes our journey to the moon.
Go smoke a bowl, put on some Pink Floyd, and go stare at the moon tonight.
For real, really. And I just wanted to say thanks again for joining us, and see you on the dark side.
It's amazing what you find face to face.
Do you enjoy the show and want to help it grow? Don't hesitate. Like, share, and donate.